There's a story passed around about the theologian Karl Barth. I don't know if it's actually a true story, but it's the kind of story that tells the truth, whether it happened or not. The setup is simple. The community is gathered around. They're asking questions of the theologian, and one concerned and earnest woman asks, "Is it true that we'll see our loved ones again in heaven?" It feels clear that this question was about the existence and nature of the afterlife. So, is it true? Will we see our loved ones again in heaven? And the doctor replies, not only the loved ones. People have argued about the afterlife for centuries, passionately and even violently, but Barth's answer pointed to what is probably the more important question for humans to think about. Heaven is idealized as a place of perfection where we experience joy at all times with all people, but that is quite a different experience than what happens for a lot of us a lot of the time here on earth. Barth has given us a chance to think about what an unending life of community with others would really mean. Perhaps today's version of Barth's retort would be the popular tweet that simply states, "Sorry, conservative Christians, but spending eternity with you people is not the selling point that you think it is." As things stand now, it's likely that you would encounter at least one person that you would rather avoid, and that at least someone would rather avoid you. Perhaps we can put it stronger and say that it's likely that every one of us would spoil heaven for at least one other person. But I can hear folks saying, in heaven we'll all be changed. It'll be easy to love each other there because everything will be perfect. And that's what always catches my attention. This aspiration is something that we can work with, even in the here and now. The ability to imagine a world, even a heaven, where people can joyfully and peacefully live in community is one of the defining features that makes us human. Dr. Samuel Paul Vessier wrote that altruism, cooperation, and caring for the vulnerable is what made our species unique. It is empathy and cooperation, not self-interest and competition, that drove our physiological, cognitive, linguistic, cultural, social, and technological evolution. We wouldn't be the large-brained, neurally plastic, intelligent, cumulatively learning, empathetic beings that we are without the mutual help that characterizes our everyday interactions. He continued by writing, our evolutionary history is one of collective child-rearing, cooperative hunting and gathering, caring for elders and the sick, and freely sharing information. This is, as he described it, a collective miracle that came before we domesticated plants and animals or settled in cities, connecting us to each other across geography, across history. This capacity is obviously not a guarantee. The injustice and suffering that has characterized the last thousands of years of human history and today's headlines both demonstrate that clearly enough. As Vessier pointed out, we have other capacities too, some that can lead us astray. For example, he wrote, we behave according to the way we expect others to expect us to behave in any given context. This is a highly complex embodied cognitive operation that we engage in without conscious effort in all but the most trying of everyday actions, from knowing how and where to sit on a bus or waiting room to ignoring the homeless or experiencing xenophobic shivers. Bystander experiments in social psychology have shed ominous light on this angle on our social minds. As strange as it may seem, someone being harassed in public is more likely to be helped by a stranger if there are less people around. If the collective mode of attention is one of callousness and ignorance, breaking that spell becomes counterintuitive and very difficult for all involved. End quote. So when that is the case, when collective callousness and ignorance has been normalized in a society, what can we do? What can we do when our social norms have come to embody injustice, oppression, and violence? First, let's remember that there's no virtue in staying in unhealthy, especially abusive relationships and communities. You cannot coerce yourself into having trust or gratitude. But we hold that caution, that very real important caution, alongside our capacity for cooperative, kind relationships. And we use the wisdom of both to learn how to establish well-being in ourselves and healthy relationships with others. That both aspect is very important. We aren't pretending that there aren't ways for this to go wrong or that we can guarantee that we will never hurt each other intentionally or unintentionally. But by honestly looking at and learning from how community can become unhealthy, we can be intentional about cultivating the skills we need to not do those things, to make those wounds less likely, and to heal from them when they do occur. And we know it is worth our effort because we also recognize that capacity within and between us for those cooperative, kind relationships. We understand how important and joyful it is to have those kinds of relationships, that's a vital part of our human happiness. One of my favorite reminders of how we can practice this comes from the Buddha. In a teaching called The Bonds of Fellowship, he described 4 grounds or habits that nurture healthy, mutual caring relationships: generosity, kind words, beneficial help, and consistency in the face of events in line with what's appropriate in each case. These bonds of fellowship function in the world like the linchpin in a moving cart. The linchpin is what prevented a chariot or cartwheel from sliding off the axle and causing the cart to crash. It's a small part, just a little thing, that plays a big role. It doesn't matter how wonderful and fancy the chariot is, it will come apart without a linchpin. That is the role of our practice in maintaining healthy relationships, helping us relate to our suffering in a more skillful way and create conditions that support compassion and wisdom. That first one, generosity, is something that is easy for us to take for granted, especially in an age where more and more of our interactions with each other are reduced to transactions. We very easily lose touch with how we are part of a complex web of life, both well-being and suffering. Losing that awareness, it's easy to get lost and miss how generosity is a vital part of building relationships. Generosity is an opportunity for us to recognize our mutual dependence and intentionally connect this with our empathy and kindness. I often think about a short teaching from the Buddha when he said that even if a person throws the rinsings of a bowl or a cup into a village pool or pond, thinking, "May whatever animals live here feed on this," that would be a sure source of merit, to say nothing of what is given to human beings. Recognizing and naming the value of our generosity, the value of those intentions for generosity, and our mutuality is also a part of our practice of community. It connects us. We learn to listen to each other, to understand what our needs are, what my needs are that I need to express to you, what your needs are that I need to know about, and to find ways to meet those needs together. And that creates a lot of mutual happiness and celebration. Generosity allows us to cultivate solidarity so that community can flourish. And we directly experience in generosity how our well-being connects us to each other. That second bit, reflecting on kind words, is a remembrance that communication isn't neutral. As Thich Nhat Hanh taught, every time we communicate, we either produce more compassion, love, and harmony, or we produce more suffering and violence. Our communication, he said, is what we put out into the world and what remains after we have left it. Every time we speak is an opportunity to express care or contempt, and to build cultures and communities of care or contempt. When we carry with us a deep remembrance that words can create happiness or suffering, we can increasingly use our words as a gift. By paying attention to how our words impact one another, we become more skillful in choosing what to say and when to say it in a way that helps instead of hurts. Practicing that third part, beneficial help, is an invitation to not just give a helping hand, as important and lovely as that is, but also to encourage each other in developing virtue, kindness, and wisdom. We take the time to learn how to, first, refrain from hurting one another. That takes paying attention. We have to learn from each other what's good for us and what's bad for us. And second, to actively support one another's well-being. This is another example of how our well-being is bound up together. Restraining from harming and supporting well-being are vital skills, and they depend on our ability to pay attention and practice discernment. Discernment depends on the relationship we have with our experiences, ourselves, each other, and impacts. When I teach meditation, one of the most common questions I hear is, well, am I doing this right? And that's fine, except that it's often connected to a very antagonistic relationship with our experience and ourselves. We get stuck in a loop of approval or disapproval, praise or blame, without ever giving ourselves the opportunity to actually understand our needs and experiences, to go be underneath that approval and disapproval to what's really happening in here. That's not beneficial help. So I try to help people shift more into the question, what happens when I do it this way? Pay attention. Does this lead to well-being in myself, others, and the world? Or does this lead to suffering in myself, others, and the world? We can start training the heart-mind in these small, more neutral moments and learn how wisdom and compassion can arise naturally with discernment. Restraint is not difficult when it arises out of discernment and a commitment to not harming others. And acting with confidence born of discernment empowers us to be more fully present with and enjoy what we choose to do. We also know that if a hurt does arise, we have the tools we need to notice and address it, and to do so before it grows so large as to become intractable. This allows us to be more relaxed and present with ourselves and each other, less hypervigilant and defensive. In another teaching, the way we treat one another is connected with gratitude. Put simply, a person of integrity is grateful and thankful. It's a wonderful insight. We can't separate gratitude from our ethics. If we're really paying attention, we begin to understand how much our ability to live ethically is connected, not just with our own decisions, but with the decisions that other people are making. If a feeling of self-righteousness is developing in us, or that we are somehow separate from or better than others, that's a sign that we need to pause. There is ultimately no way for me to cultivate my well-being at the expense or separate from your well-being. And there's no way for you to cultivate your well-being at the expense or separate from my well-being. Our well-being depends on one another. If we cultivate awareness of this, then when the conditions are supportive for virtue, generosity, compassion, and wisdom, we naturally feel gratitude. We just need to learn to pay attention. And we do all of this consistently over time, the fourth bit. This isn't haphazard, it's a habit. It's the consistency that allows it to become something real. In each situation we find ourselves in, we discern the most skillful way to respond in line with what's appropriate in each case. In time, these choices become cultures and processes that can support well-being instead of making things worse. Saying all this, we realize that community is a practice. And again, there are no guarantees. We know what it feels like to be crushed by injustice, wounded by conflict, traumatized by violence and abuse. Sometimes there is no linchpin, and the only path for us is to go our separate ways, to break a cycle of harm, hopefully before the wheel goes flying off. There is pain in that, but there's also peace and even some happiness. This is a very hopeful and practical approach, even when our family relationships are not ideal, when our parents, partners, or children are strained, relationships with them are strained or even broken. We have trouble with folks at work or in our community, because we know that ultimately we are helping create conditions where the possibility of healthy, wise relationships is something real. And that is a great gift and a cause for happiness. Our growing well-being becomes an invitation and an example that invites others to cultivate well-being, because, again, our well-being is bound up together. This is something we can do. It is part of our deep history, the gift of unfathomable millennia of evolution, collective child rearing, cooperative hunting and gathering, caring for elders and the sick, freely sharing information. We can be intentional about consistently practicing generosity, kind words, and beneficial help. We can reconnect with our evolutionary roots, both honoring all that is good and healing all the harm that we've inherited from our ancestors. We might not ever make this a heaven on earth, but we can surely make it a lot less like hell. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.